Alright, today we're going to be reading The Girl Who Could Fly, and this is an excerpt from a book by Victoria Forrester. So this portion of the book, just as the title is telling us, it's clear that the genre of this book is a fantasy. So as you listen today, be looking for a few things. Notice objects, people, or places that repeat as symbols that could represent bigger ideas. And I want you to notice clues or details that could lead us to possible themes for this story. It was a Thursday afternoon like any other that Betty set about changing Piper's diaper in the kitchen table, no differently than she'd done 100 times before. When Betty turned away for just one moment, Piper rolled, quick as a flash, off the edge of the table. Now, as any other baby would have immediately fallen to the floor and screamed itself silly. Not Piper. To Betty's astonishment, Piper simply floated in the air next to the table. Yes, so this is a classic fantasy story. First, the story introduces an ordinary character, and then suddenly, she can do something supernatural. So let's keep reading to see how she uses this power. Lord save us! Betty choked her hand and clutched the terrified swollen inside her chest. Piper giggled and bobbed up and down in the air. Betty quickly scooped Piper into her arms and held tightly onto her from that moment on. As the time passed, and despite Betty's sincere prayers, the situation got worse, not better. Piper was discovered bobbing about the parlor ceiling and either wouldn't, or couldn't, return to the ground. Joe was dispatched out to the shed to fetch a ladder. Several weeks later, in the wee hours of the night, Joe discovered Piper sleep-floating several feet above her crib. Then there was that particular gusty day when Piper suddenly took to floating and was swept up in the wind and carried her 3 full fields before she became snarled in the branches of a tree, and Joe had to fetch her down. When Piper reached the age of 5 and was still known to unexpectedly float across the room, Betty finally felt that the time had come to broach the matter. "Seems like she ain't normal is all I'm sayin'," Betty helplessly offered to Doc Bell. "How's that?" Doc Bell questioned. Doc Bell had seen generations come and go, and all manner of things happen to them in Lowland County. He'd seen the youngest Smith boy cough up a screwdriver and a whole pack of 2-inch nails. He'd been there when Clara Cassie Markin's head turned all the way around and then back again. Doc Bell had even seen a grown man talk backwards after he was bumped on the head by a hay bale. The little girl dangling her legs off the examining table had 10 fingers and 10 toes, was no taller or smaller, no smarter or dumber, no thinner or fatter than a child her age should be. She was, in short, like every other child in the farming community of Lowland. So, Lowland. It's kind of an ironic name for a town with a girl who could fly. So I wonder if the author did that on purpose. Low can have multiple meanings. Think about how you might use the word low in various ways. And you can be low to the ground. You can also be feeling low. You can set low expectations. Maybe the name of this farming community is leading us to some possible themes. Well, Mr. McCloud and we've been noticing that she's, stammered Betty, not sure exactly how to describe her condition. "Well, she's a mite high-spirited." Doc Bell chuckled and turned away to wash his hands. "A child her age should have plenty of energy to spare. But it isn't anything to worry yourselves about. Give her plenty of exercise and a lot of fresh air. Nothing wrong with her. She's as normal as you or I." When Doc Bell turned back around, he discovered that Piper had somehow managed to hoist herself 5 feet into the air, where she was dangling from a light fixture that hung from the ceiling. There, she began to swing back and forth. For the briefest of moments, Doc Bell looked into Betty's alarmed face, and then notioned that Piper McCloud might indeed be more than high-spirited crossed his mind. Doc Bell was a man of science, though, so he naturally let the matter go. "You've got a little monkey on your hands, Mrs. McCloud," Doc Bell chuckled. And upon the medical recommendation and with relief, Betty decided to let the child be. All the same, she felt it was wise to homeschool Piper until such time that her high spirits, however normal they might be, were, well, less high. By her 9th birthday, Piper had long nut-brown hair that was fixed in 2 braids, bright blue eyes, which she hated, and her most constant companion was loneliness, as well as some other feelings she couldn't quite place a name to. "Ever think something's not right, but you can't get at it, Pa?" Perched atop a fence, Piper watched as Joe fixed a loose blade on the plow. Joe shrugged uncertainly. "It's like I got an itch right here," Piper continued, pointing to her midsection just below her ribs. "But I can't get at it, and it just keeps scratching at me and scratching at me. But on the inside, you reckon maybe there's something that'll make it stop itching, so I told Ma about it the other day, and she figured it was caused by all the fool ideas I had in my head." Piper continued, heedless of her father's inability to respond. "I didn't think my ideas were fool, but Mama says I'd do better to keep quiet, keep my feet on the ground, and mind my own business. She says it's wrong to go flittering away my hours asking questions when there's work to be done. But I don't see how a question can be wrong. Can you, Pa? I see that maybe we shouldn't go about killing and eating cows when they are so peaceful like. Ma says that was foolish, and that God put the cows here just so we can eat 'em. But that don't seem like such a good deal for the cows to me. Preacher told us not more than 4 Sundays ago that God loves all his creatures, but it ain't lovin' to my way of thinking to create a thing just for it to be food. Them cows ain't done nothin' to us, which got me to thinking that maybe we got it wrong, and they got a purpose and we don't know nothin' about. Maybe it's a secret. So I started watching the cows, quiet-like so they wouldn't notice, aiming to see if I couldn't guess that purpose. And I think I knows it, Pa. I do. Want to hear?" So Piper seems to be rambling on here. She's just talking on and on. So at this point in the story, what do we already know about Piper? So think for a minute. What do we already know about Piper? Alas, all he could do was stand helplessly rooted to a spot as Piper continued. Which, of course, Piper did. It was the way they was flicking their tails to ward off the flies that gave it away. Piper leaned into Joe and lowered her voice secretively, lest the chickens catch wind of her words. "You see, all of them was doing it but one. The black one with the brown eyes was just standing real still, looking off to the next field over where the sheep were grazing. The flies were buzzing around her just the same as the other, but her tail stayed dead still. So I got to watching that cow, and every day she did the same thing until I realized what she was looking at." "What?" Joe asked, breathlessly unaware that he had posted the question. "The place where her calf done died on her not more than 6 months before, remember?" Joe nodded. Indeed, he remembered. It had been a difficult birth, and the weakened calf had only lived a few hours before it passed on. "She's mourning him something terrible, and it seems to me that if a cow can feel so for a young'un, then it's probably got feelin's about all sorts of things, feelings we don't know nothing about. And then I got to thinking that if each of them cows got feelings, then they can have a purpose no different from us folks. which got me thinking about our purpose in life if they aim to do something about it. You know what I mean, Pa? Piper looked into her father's face and found only lines of confusion. So even though Joe doesn't really understand what Piper's trying to say, maybe you have an idea. Think about why Piper is talking about cows with such passion. If you have an idea, jot it down in your reading journal. Several days later, in the heat of the afternoon, Piper escaped to the biggest oak tree on the farm and climbed halfway up to enjoy the breeze that rustled through the leaves there. The itch inside her was acting up and wouldn't give her any peace, so she rolled over onto the branch and held her stomach. From her position, she could spy a robin landing on the nearby nest, when she began feeding a fat worm to her babies. Watching the robin, Piper let her mind wander. Maybe other kids my age have the same itch, Piper considered. Maybe if I could talk to them, they'd tell me how to get at it. Fat chance that ever going to happen, what with her stuck out on the farm and all. I never get to go nowhere or do nothing, Piper thought to herself. Only 2 places I've ever been is church and Doc Bell's. Why can't I go to school like them Miller kids? Piper asked her mother 1,000 times. Each morning, Piper watched them from the hayloft, walking to school. She'd have given her front teeth to go with them. You do your schoolwork just as well here, that's why, Betty always said, and was plain and to the point. What do you think the real reason is that Betty doesn't want to send Piper to school? All of a sudden, Piper was roused from her thoughts by an unexpected drama that was unfolding on the branch before her very eyes. The mother robin was nudging one of her babies towards the edge of the nest. The little fellow was hardly bigger than Piper's thumb, and had a smattering of feathers poking out of him. Using her beak, the robin gave her baby a good shove that pushed him clear out of the nest, over the branch, and into the air. To Piper's horror, the baby robin dropped like a stone in a flurry of wings flapping. But then, just as he was about to hit the ground, he managed to pump his wings so hard that he stopped falling and started slowly, very slowly, rising. Right then, that little bird learned to fly, and Piper saw the whole thing. Holy moly! Piper breathed and shook her head in wonder. It was the darndest thing she'd ever seen. Then the mother robin did it again, and her second baby was born into flight. By the time the third baby was being ready to take off, Piper was struck by a lightning idea. Piper sat bolt upright on the branch, almost falling off it completely. Grabbing hold with both hands, she steadied her body while her mind raced like a jackrabbit. From the moment she was born, Piper had floated. It came naturally to her, like breathing. Because she'd always done it, she didn't think it was such a big deal. One minute she'd be sitting on the rug in front of the fire, and the next she'd be bobbing up to the ceiling. It happened all the time, and it was fun. The problem with floating was that you never knew where it would take you. Which wasn't bad at all, but sometimes a person likes to have a bit more direction in their lives than to be at the whim of a strong breeze. There's a big difference between floating and flying. Clouds float, balloons float, but birds fly. Maybe Ma and Pa just forgot to push me like them baby birds, Piper considered, knowing full well that she was going to have to take matters into her own hands. It's high time I got to flying too. And that is the end of our excerpt. So when Piper talks about flying here, I think she might be talking about more than just her supernatural power. What do you think? I want you to stop and jot what Piper means by this phrase. It's high time I got to flying too.